My daughter-in-law blocked my entry to my husband's funeral. A week later, at the inheritance meeting, she laughed and said, "The law is on our side." I called the actual lawyer and she got a surprise. But let me start from the beginning, because what happened that gray October morning changed everything I thought I knew about family, love, and the lengths some people will go to destroy both. I had been married to Thomas for 42 years. 42 years of sharing coffee every morning, of him reading me the newspaper while I made breakfast, of quiet evenings where we didn't need words to understand each other. When the doctor told us about his heart condition 6 months ago, we faced it together, like we had faced everything else. Thomas was 71, I was 65, and we thought we had time. We thought we had more time. Amanda had been part of our lives for only 3 years, ever since she married our son Michael. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching. From the very beginning, something felt wrong about her, but I kept those feelings to myself. Thomas always said I was too protective of Michael, too suspicious of the women he brought home. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was just being the typical mother-in-law who thought no woman was good enough for her son. But Amanda was different. She had this way of inserting herself into every conversation, every family decision. She would smile sweetly while correcting me about things that happened in my own home, in my own life. "Oh, Ruth, I think you're remembering that wrong," she would say with that patronizing tone that made my skin crawl. Michael told me it happened differently. The worst part was watching Michael change. My son, who used to call me every Sunday just to chat, suddenly became distant. Amanda always had an excuse for why they couldn't visit, why they had to leave early, why I couldn't see my grandchildren as often. "Ruth is getting a bit clingy," I heard her tell someone on the phone once. "We need to set some boundaries." When Thomas had his first heart attack 3 months ago, Amanda was the one who insisted he needed peace and quiet during his recovery. She convinced Michael that my visits were too stressful for his father. I was allowed to see my own husband for only an hour a day, and only when Amanda approved it. She moved into our house claiming she needed to manage his care, and suddenly I felt like a stranger in my own home. Thomas tried to protest, but he was weak, and Amanda had a way of making her control seem like concern. "I just want what's best for him," she would say whenever I questioned her decisions. "Don't you want what's best for Thomas, Ruth?" The morning Thomas died, I wasn't even there. Amanda had convinced Michael that I needed a break and had sent me to stay with my sister for the weekend. I got the call at 6:47 a.m. "Ruth." Michael's voice was strange, distant. "Dad's gone." I drove the 3 hours back home in a haze of grief and disbelief. When I arrived at our house, there were already cars in the driveway. Amanda's friends, people I barely knew, were coming and going like they owned the place. I walked through my own front door and felt like an intruder. "Oh, Ruth!" Amanda appeared immediately, dressed in an expensive black dress I'd never seen before. "I'm so sorry for your loss." The way she said it, like Thomas had been my loss alone, like she was the one offering comfort to the grieving neighbor. "Where is he?" I asked, looking around for any sign of my husband. "The funeral home picked him up this morning," she said, not meeting my eyes. "I've already made all the arrangements. I thought it would be easier for you given your state." My state. I was a woman who had just lost her husband of 42 years. But apparently that meant I was incapable of making decisions about his funeral. "I need to see the arrangements," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to understand what's been planned." Amanda's expression shifted slightly, that sweet mask slipping just enough for me to see something cold underneath. "Everything's been taken care of, Ruth. You don't need to worry about the details." "He's my husband," I said, my voice breaking. "I have the right to—" "Actually," Amanda interrupted, pulling a folder from her purse. "Thomas gave me power of attorney 3 weeks ago. For medical decisions and, well, everything else. I'm legally responsible for all arrangements now." I stared at the papers she showed me, the official-looking documents with Thomas's signature at the bottom. When had this happened? Why hadn't anyone told me? The funeral was scheduled for the following Tuesday at St. Mark's Presbyterian, the church where Thomas and I had been married, where we had celebrated Christmas and Easter for decades. I spent the next 3 days in a strange limbo, staying in the guest bedroom of my own house while Amanda orchestrated everything around me. She chose the flowers, the music, the speakers. She wrote the obituary without consulting me, describing Thomas as a beloved father and husband, but somehow managing to make it sound like I was an afterthought in his life. When I tried to add my own memories, she told me the program was already finalized. "There's just no room for changes now," she said, with that sympathetic smile that never reached her eyes. The morning of the funeral, I dressed carefully in the black dress Thomas had always said made me look elegant. I put on the pearl necklace he had given me for our 20th anniversary, and I prepared to say goodbye to the man who had been my whole world. But when I arrived at the church, Amanda was standing at the entrance with two men I didn't recognize. "Ruth," she said, blocking my path to the door. "I'm sorry, but I don't think you should be here today. I felt like I'd been slapped." "What are you talking about? This is my husband's funeral." "I know this is difficult," Amanda said, her voice dripping with false concern. "But you've been so emotional lately. So unstable. The family thinks it would be better if you said your goodbyes privately." The family. My family. Michael appeared behind her, looking uncomfortable but not contradicting her words. "Michael?" I reached for my son, my voice breaking. "Please. This is your father. This is my husband." He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Mom, maybe Amanda's right. Maybe this isn't the best place for you right now." I looked around, desperate, and saw the faces of people I had known for decades. Friends from the church, neighbors, Thomas's colleagues. They were all watching this scene unfold, and none of them were stepping forward to help me. "You have two options," Amanda said quietly, so only I could hear. "You can leave quietly, or these gentlemen will escort you out. Your choice." I looked at the two men flanking her, clearly hired security, and I understood that this wasn't a request. This was a command. I turned and walked back to my car, my legs shaking, my whole body trembling with a combination of grief and rage I had never experienced before. I sat in the parking lot and watched through the church windows as strangers filled the pews where I should have been sitting in the front row. I watched Amanda accept condolences like the grieving widow, watched her dabbing at tears that seemed perfectly timed. I watched my son stand beside her, supporting her instead of looking for me, and I realized that somehow, in 3 short years, Amanda had managed to erase me from my own life. I was no longer Thomas's wife, Michael's mother, or even a welcome guest at my own husband's funeral. But as I drove away from that church, leaving my husband's funeral behind, I made myself a promise. This wasn't over. Amanda might have won this battle, but she had no idea who she was really fighting. She thought she had destroyed me, but she had only awakened something I didn't know I still had. The woman who had raised 3 children, who had built a life from nothing, who had stood by her husband through every challenge was still inside me. Amanda wanted to play games with my family, my home, my life? Fine, but she was about to learn that some women don't break. They plan. The week after Thomas's funeral passed in a blur of hollow condolences and empty casserole dishes left on my doorstep by neighbors who didn't know what else to do. I moved through my own house like a ghost, touching familiar objects that suddenly felt foreign. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt right. Amanda had moved out the day after the funeral, taking Michael with her back to their apartment across town. For the first time in months, I was alone in my own home. But instead of relief, I felt an unsettling emptiness. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was ominous. I should have known something was wrong when I tried to access our joint bank account on Thursday morning. The card was declined at the grocery store in front of Mrs. Henderson from down the street, who had been buying milk behind me in line. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment as I fumbled through my purse for cash. "System error," the young cashier said with practiced indifference. "Happens all the time with older cards." But when I called the bank from home, the representative's voice was carefully neutral. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm showing that your access to that account has been temporarily suspended pending verification of recent account changes." "What changes?" I asked, my stomach dropping. "This is my account. I've had this account for 25 years. I understand your confusion, ma'am. You'll need to speak with our estate services department. They handle accounts when there's been a death in the family." Estate services. Like I was some distant relative instead of Thomas's wife. Friday brought the first real sign of what Amanda had planned. I was in the kitchen, trying to force myself to eat something, when I heard a key turning in the front door. My heart jumped for a moment, thinking it was Michael, but the footsteps were too light, too quick. Amanda walked into my kitchen like she owned it, carrying a cardboard box and wearing a businesslike expression I'd never seen before. "Ruth," she said, setting the box on the counter. "We need to talk." "About what?" I stood up, suddenly very aware that I was wearing an old bathrobe and hadn't combed my hair properly in days. She pulled out a thick folder of documents, the same official-looking papers she'd shown me before. "Thomas made some significant changes to his affairs before he passed. I wanted to explain them to you personally, rather than having you find out through lawyers." The way she said it, like she was doing me a favor, made my skin crawl. "What kind of changes?" "Well," Amanda spread the papers across my kitchen table, the same table where Thomas and I had eaten breakfast every morning for 15 years. The power of attorney Thomas gave me extends beyond medical decisions. He also granted me authority over all financial and property matters. I stared at the documents, trying to make sense of the legal language. What does that mean exactly? It means I'm responsible for managing the estate according to Thomas's wishes, she said, her tone becoming more businesslike. And unfortunately, there are some difficult decisions that need to be made. She pulled out another set of papers, these ones looking more recent. The house, for instance. Thomas was concerned about the mortgage payments, the property taxes, the maintenance costs. He felt that keeping this place wasn't practical for someone in your situation. My situation? The words came out sharper than I intended. Amanda's expression softened into that patronizing sympathy again. Ruth, you're 65 years old, living alone in a 4-bedroom house. Thomas was worried about you being able to manage everything on your own. The stairs, the yard work, the financial responsibility. I felt like I was watching this conversation happen to someone else. This is my home, Amanda. Thomas and I bought this house when Michael was 5 years old. We raised our family here. I know how difficult this must be, she said, but her tone suggested she was already moving past my feelings to practical matters. That's why I've arranged for a very smooth transition. There's a lovely senior community about 20 minutes from here. They have apartments specifically designed for women in your situation, women in my situation, widows, discarded wives, women who had outlived their usefulness. I haven't agreed to sell this house, I said, my voice getting stronger. I don't want to move to some senior community. This is where I belong. Amanda sighed, like I was being unreasonably stubborn. Ruth, I don't think you understand. The decision has already been made. I have legal authority to act in the estate's best interests, and keeping this house simply isn't sustainable. She pulled out yet another document, this one with a real estate agent's letterhead. I've already had the house appraised and listed with Morrison and Associates. They're very optimistic about a quick sale. My hands started shaking. You listed my house? Without telling me? I'm telling you now, Amanda said, and for the first time, I heard a slight edge in her voice. The realtor will be here Monday morning to take photos and put up the sign. I'd suggest you start packing the things you want to keep. I looked around my kitchen, at the coffee mug Thomas had used every morning, at the windowsill where I'd grown herbs for 30 years, at the refrigerator covered with photos of grandchildren I was barely allowed to see anymore. Where am I supposed to go while you're selling my house from under me? Amanda reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. Golden Years Manor has some lovely temporary accommodations. I've already put down a deposit for you. The card showed a sterile-looking building with a name that sounded more like a prison than a home. You want me to move into a nursing home? It's not a nursing home, it's an assisted living facility, Amanda corrected. You'll have your own apartment, meals provided, activities planned. It'll be much easier for you. Easier for whom, I wondered, but I was too stunned to ask. The moving truck will be here Sunday to collect the items you want to keep, Amanda continued, checking something on her phone. Everything else will be donated or disposed of. I've hired a company that specializes in estate cleanouts. Estate cleanouts. Like Thomas and I had been hoarders instead of people who had built a life together. I need to call Michael, I said, reaching for the phone. He needs to know about this. Amanda's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. Michael is completely supportive of these arrangements. He agrees that this is what's best for you. I want to hear that from him. Of course, Amanda said, but she was already gathering up her papers. He's at work right now, but I'm sure you can reach him later. She stood up, smoothing down her dress. I know this is a lot to process, Ruth, but I want you to know that this is all being done with love. Thomas was so worried about you being alone, about you struggling to maintain this big house. This way you'll have support, security, people looking after you, people looking after me, not family. Not people who loved me, just people who were paid to keep me alive and out of the way. After Amanda left, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the business card for Golden Years Manor. The woman in the glossy photo looked happy, but her smile seemed as artificial as Amanda's sympathy. I tried calling Michael 6 times that evening. Each call went straight to voicemail. By the 7th call, the mailbox was full. That night, I walked through every room of my house, touching things Thomas and I had chosen together. The couch where we'd watched television every evening, the bedroom where we'd shared our dreams and fears for 4 decades, the guest room where our grandchildren had slept during weekend visits. All of it was being taken away from me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it, or so I thought. Saturday morning, I was drinking coffee from Thomas's favorite mug when I noticed something odd. A piece of mail had been forwarded from our old address, before we'd moved to this house 20 years ago. It was from a law firm I'd never heard of, addressed to Thomas Morrison. I almost threw it away, thinking it was just another sympathy card or business correspondence that would follow him for months, but something made me open it. Inside was a letter dated just 2 weeks before Thomas died, requesting confirmation of an appointment to update his will and estate planning documents. But according to Amanda, Thomas had already updated everything. He'd given her power of attorney, changed all his beneficiaries, made arrangements for my future. So why was a different law firm trying to schedule an appointment with him just days before he died? I read the letter 3 times, and each time I felt a little spark of something I hadn't felt since the funeral. Hope. Maybe Amanda wasn't as in control as she thought she was. Maybe Thomas had been planning something she didn't know about. Maybe this wasn't over after all. The invitation came on Monday morning, slipped under my door while I was upstairs packing boxes I never thought I'd have to pack. It was written on expensive cream-colored paper, the kind Amanda always used for special occasions, as if kicking me out of my own life deserved formal stationery. Ruth, it read in Amanda's careful handwriting, please join us for the formal reading of Thomas's will and estate planning documents. Wednesday, 2 p.m. at the Morrison and Associates conference room. This will finalize all inheritance matters and legal transfers. Your presence is required. Required, not requested, not invited. Required like I was being summoned to court. I spent Tuesday night lying awake, staring at the ceiling of the bedroom Thomas and I had shared for 20 years. The moving boxes were stacked against the walls like cardboard tombstones, marking the death of everything I'd thought was permanent in my life. In 2 days, I would be living in a sterile apartment at Golden Years Manor, eating meals prepared by strangers, surrounded by people who were waiting to die. But that letter from the other law firm kept nagging at me. I'd called their office twice, but both times I was told that Mr. Harrison was unavailable and would return my call. He never did. Wednesday afternoon, I dressed carefully in my best navy suit, the one I'd worn to Michael's wedding 3 years ago. If this was going to be my final humiliation, at least I would face it with dignity. Morrison and Associates had offices in a sleek downtown building that screamed expensive legal services. The conference room was on the 15th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city where I'd lived my entire adult life. It felt like viewing my whole world from the outside. Amanda was already there when I arrived, sitting at the head of a polished mahogany table like she was chairing a board meeting. She'd brought Michael, who wouldn't meet my eyes, and 2 other people I didn't recognize. A middle-aged woman with short gray hair and a younger man in an expensive suit who was shuffling through a briefcase full of documents. Ruth, Amanda stood up as I entered, gesturing to a chair at the far end of the table. Thank you for coming. I'd like you to meet Mr. Patterson, Thomas's attorney, and Mrs. Kellaway from the estate planning firm. I took the seat they'd indicated, feeling like I was sitting in the defendant's chair at my own trial. Mr. Patterson looked professional enough, but something about his nervous energy made me uncomfortable. He kept glancing at Amanda like he was waiting for cues. Mrs. Morrison, he began, opening a leather folder. I want to express my condolences for your loss. Thomas was a remarkable man, and I know this is a difficult time for everyone. His words sounded rehearsed, like he'd practiced them in the mirror. I nodded but didn't speak. We're here today to review Thomas's final will and testament, as well as the estate planning documents he finalized in his last weeks, Mr. Patterson continued. As you know, Thomas made some significant changes to ensure his family's security and future. He pulled out a thick document and began reading in that formal, legal tone that makes everything sound both important and meaningless. The language was dense, full of whereases and heretofores, but the message was clear enough. Everything was going to Amanda: the house, the bank accounts, the life insurance policy, even Thomas's pension benefits. According to this will, I was entitled to a small monthly allowance, barely enough to cover the costs at Golden Years Manor, and nothing else. But, I interrupted, my voice cutting through his monotone reading. We owned that house together. We bought it together. We've been paying the mortgage together for 20 years. How can Thomas leave something that's half mine to someone else? Mr. Patterson glanced at Amanda before answering. Mrs. Morrison, according to these documents, your husband had significant concerns about your ability to manage complex financial matters independently. The estate planning team determined that placing everything under Mrs. Amanda Morrison's guardianship would provide the most security for your future. Guardianship. Like I was a child or someone mentally incompetent. Thomas never mentioned any of this to me, I said, feeling my voice get stronger. In 42 years of marriage, he never once suggested I couldn't handle our finances. I balanced our checkbook every month. I managed our investments. Ruth, Amanda's voice was gentle but firm. You're grieving. You're not thinking clearly. Thomas was protecting you from decisions that might be too overwhelming in your emotional state. The younger man, Mrs. Kellaway, nodded sympathetically. These arrangements are actually quite common when there's a significant age gap between spouses and concerns about cognitive decline. I'm 65 years old, I said sharply. I don't have cognitive decline. And there's only a 6-year age gap between Thomas and me. Of course not, Amanda said quickly. No one is suggesting that. But Thomas felt that having professional management of the estate would give you peace of mind. You won't have to worry about property taxes or investment decisions or any of those stressful financial matters. I looked at Michael, silently pleading with him to say something, to defend me, to question why his mother was being treated like an incompetent stranger. But he was staring at his hands, his face carefully blank. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat and continued reading. The will included detailed provisions for my care and maintenance, including my residence at Golden Years Manor, my monthly allowance, and even restrictions on my spending for non-essential items. What constitutes non-essential? I asked. Amanda pulled out a printed list. Well, we want to make sure you're not taken advantage of by scammers or high-pressure salespeople, so any purchase over $50 needs pre-approval from the estate manager. $50. I needed permission to buy groceries for a week or replace a pair of shoes. And travel, Mrs. Kellaway added, consulting her notes. Any trips or extended stays away from the facility need to be approved 48 hours in advance. For safety reasons. Safety reasons. I was being put under house arrest, and they were calling it safety. The meeting dragged on for another hour, with Mr. Patterson explaining various clauses and provisions, all of which seemed designed to ensure I had no control over any aspect of my own life. When he finally closed the folder, Amanda smiled that bright, artificial smile. I know this is a lot to process, Ruth, but I want you to know that everything is being done with love. Thomas's greatest wish was that you would be safe and cared for, and that's exactly what's going to happen. She reached across the table and patted my hand, like I was a confused elderly relative at a nursing home. The law is on our side with this. Everything has been filed properly. All the documents are legal and binding. You don't need to worry about anything anymore. The law is on our side. The way she said it, with such confidence, such satisfaction, made something cold settle in my stomach. This wasn't just about money or property. This was about power, about control, about erasing me completely, while pretending it was for my own good. As we left the conference room, I overheard Amanda talking quietly to Mr. Patterson by the elevators. The transition should be smooth, she was saying. She'll be moved into the facility by Friday, and the house sale should close within the month. And if she challenges any of this? Mr. Patterson asked. Amanda laughed, a sound with no warmth in it. With what resources? She has no access to funds for legal representation, and frankly, the documentation is ironclad. Thomas was very thorough in his planning. I pretended to be looking for something in my purse, but I was listening to every word. Besides, Amanda continued, who's going to believe a grieving widow over properly executed legal documents? The poor thing is clearly not thinking straight. That evening, back in my empty house, I sat surrounded by boxes and tried to understand how my entire life had been dismantled so efficiently. But the more I thought about that meeting, the more things felt wrong. Thomas had always been meticulous about important decisions. He would never have made changes this significant without discussing them with me, without at least mentioning his concerns. And Mr. Patterson, despite his professional appearance, had seemed nervous, almost guilty. I pulled out the letter from the other law firm again and stared at the letterhead. Harrison, Wells, and Associates. The appointment Thomas had apparently made just 2 weeks before he died. This time, when I called, I didn't leave a message. I told the receptionist I was Thomas Morrison's widow and that I needed to speak with Mr. Harrison immediately about urgent estate matters. Within 5 minutes, I was talking to a man whose voice sounded genuinely surprised and concerned. Mrs. Morrison, Mr. Harrison said, I'm so sorry for your loss. I was wondering why Thomas never kept his appointment with us. We had scheduled a meeting to finalize his new will and estate planning documents. My heart started pounding. His new will? Yes, he'd contacted us about making significant changes to his existing estate plan. He was quite specific about wanting to ensure his wife would be fully protected and provided for. He seemed concerned that someone might try to take advantage of the situation after his death. I gripped the phone tighter. Mr. Harrison, I need to ask you something very important. Did Thomas ever give anyone power of attorney over his affairs? There was a pause. Mrs. Morrison, I think you and I need to meet in person. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope, mixed with a growing certainty that Amanda's perfectly orchestrated legal performance was about to fall apart. She had made one crucial mistake. She had underestimated the man she was trying to erase from his own legacy, and she had no idea what Thomas had really been planning in those final weeks of his life. Mr. Harrison's office felt like stepping into a different world. Where Amanda's attorney had been all nervous energy and rehearsed speeches, James Harrison was calm, methodical, and genuinely concerned. His gray beard and kind eyes reminded me of my father, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like someone was actually listening to me. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, gesturing to a comfortable chair across from his desk, "please, tell me everything that's happened since Thomas passed." I started from the beginning, from being blocked at the funeral to yesterday's humiliating meeting. Mr. Harrison listened without interrupting, occasionally taking notes, his expression growing more serious with each detail I shared. "And this Mr. Patterson," he said when I finished. "You'd never heard Thomas mention him before?" "Never. Thomas always used Brewster and Associates for our legal needs. They handled our house purchase, our wills, everything. I'd never heard of Patterson before Amanda introduced him." Mr. Harrison pulled out a thick file and opened it carefully. "Mrs. Morrison, Thomas contacted me 6 weeks before he died. He was very specific about his concerns and what he wanted to accomplish." He handed me a legal pad covered in Thomas's distinctive handwriting. My eyes filled with tears seeing those familiar scrawled notes again. "He was worried about Amanda," Mr. Harrison continued. "He'd become suspicious of her behavior, her increasing control over household decisions, her isolation of you from Michael and the grandchildren." I stared at the notes, seeing phrases in Thomas's writing that made my heart race. Amanda pushing Ruth out, Michael completely under her influence, need to protect Ruth from manipulation. "Thomas told me he'd discovered some troubling information about Amanda's past," Mr. Harrison said carefully. "He'd hired a private investigator to look into her background before your son married her, but the report came back after the wedding. He never shared it with Michael because he hoped he was wrong about his suspicions." "What kind of suspicions?" Mr. Harrison pulled out another folder, this one marked "Confidential" in red letters. Amanda Richardson, before she became Amanda Morrison, had been married twice before. Both husbands died under suspicious circumstances, and both times she inherited everything. My blood turned cold. "Are you saying—" "I'm not saying anything about how they died," Mr. Harrison said quickly. But the pattern was concerning enough that Thomas wanted to take precautions. Her first husband, Robert Richardson, died of a heart attack at age 52. Amanda inherited his construction business and sold it immediately. Her second husband, David Chen, died in what was ruled an accidental fall downstairs. Amanda inherited his tech company stock options worth nearly $2 million. I felt dizzy. She never mentioned being married before. According to the investigator's report, she's quite skilled at reinventing herself. Different name variations, different stories about her past. When she married Michael, she told your family she was a widow, correct? Yes. She said her first husband died in a car accident. She was very emotional about it, said she couldn't talk about the details. Mr. Harrison nodded grimly. There was no car accident, and there was no first husband named David Morrison, which is the name she gave your family. The room seemed to be spinning. Does Michael know any of this? Thomas was planning to tell him everything after finalizing his new will. He wanted to make sure you were legally protected first in case Amanda tried to retaliate against the family. What was in the new will? Mr. Harrison pulled out a draft document, thick with legal language but clear in its intent. "Everything goes to you, Mrs. Morrison. The house, all bank accounts, life insurance, pension benefits. Amanda gets nothing. Michael inherits only after both you and Thomas are gone, and only if he's not married to Amanda at the time." I stared at the papers, hardly believing what I was seeing. Thomas was going to cut her out completely? More than that, he was planning to present Michael with the investigator's report and give him an ultimatum. Either he separates from Amanda or he loses his inheritance entirely. But this was never finalized? Mr. Harrison's expression darkened. Thomas died 2 days before our scheduled appointment. Very convenient timing for someone who knew what he was planning. The implication hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. I thought about Amanda insisting on managing Thomas's care, about her sending me away the weekend he died, about how quickly she'd moved to take control of everything. "Mr. Harrison, what can we do? She has documents saying Thomas gave her power of attorney, that he changed his will to leave everything to her." "About that, Mr. Harrison said, reaching for his phone. "I took the liberty of contacting some colleagues about Mr. Patterson. It seems he's not actually licensed to practice law in this state. His license was revoked 3 years ago for falsifying documents." My mouth fell open. "He's not a real lawyer?" "Oh, he was once," But he lost his license and has been working as what you might call a professional document creator. People hire him when they need official-looking paperwork that won't hold up to serious scrutiny. So the will Amanda showed me is completely fraudulent. The power of attorney documents, the estate planning papers, all of it. None of it is legally binding. I felt a mixture of relief and rage so intense I could barely speak. She had me believing I was losing everything. She made me think Thomas had abandoned me. Mrs. Morrison, I need to ask you something difficult. Do you think Amanda knew Thomas was planning to expose her? I thought back to those last weeks of Thomas's life, remembering how Amanda had suddenly become even more controlling, more insistent on managing his medication, his diet, his visitors. She was giving him new supplements, I said slowly. Heart vitamins, she called them, said his doctor recommended them, but Thomas never mentioned any doctor recommending anything like that. Mr. Harrison was taking notes again. Do you still have any of those supplements? They might still be in the medicine cabinet. Amanda cleaned out most of his medications, but she might have missed something. Mrs. Morrison, I think we need to contact the police. But what proof do we have? It's my word against hers. And she has all those fake documents. Mr. Harrison smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. Actually, we have more than you think. You see, Thomas was very thorough. He didn't just hire an investigator to look into Amanda's past. He also installed a small recording device in his home office. Activated by voice, he was documenting everything Amanda said and did in those final weeks. My heart started pounding. Recording device? Hidden in his desk lamp. He told me about it in case something happened to him before we could finalize everything. He said if anything suspicious occurred, I should tell you to check inside the base of his desk lamp, Thomas's desk lamp. It was still in his office, probably packed in one of the boxes Amanda had prepared for donation. There's more, Mr. Harrison continued. Thomas also opened a safety deposit box at First National Bank 3 weeks before he died. Only you have access to it. He said you'd know which box and that the key was hidden somewhere only you would think to look. I closed my eyes, thinking. Thomas had always been sentimental about our anniversary. Every year he'd hide my gift in the same place, joking that I'd never find it, but I always did. I think I know where it is, I said. Mrs. Morrison, if that recording device contains what Thomas thought it would, and if that safety deposit box has copies of the real documents Amanda destroyed, then we have everything we need to not only expose her fraud, but potentially prove something much more serious. As I left Mr. Harrison's office, my hands were shaking, but not from fear. For the first time since Thomas died, I felt like I was fighting back. Amanda thought she'd destroyed me, thought she'd erased me from my own life. But she'd made a crucial mistake. She'd underestimated the man she'd been living with, and she'd underestimated the woman who'd been married to him for 42 years. Thomas had been protecting me even after death, and I was about to make sure his final plan succeeded. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. That night, I waited until after midnight to return to my house. Amanda had given me until Friday to finish packing, and I knew she wouldn't expect me back so late. The neighborhood was quiet, streetlights casting long shadows across the yard where Thomas used to tend his roses. I let myself in through the back door, moving carefully through the dark kitchen toward Thomas's office. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure the neighbors could hear it. Everything looked different in the darkness, like I was seeing my own home through a stranger's eyes. Thomas's office was exactly as Amanda had left it, with boxes labeled Donate stacked against the walls. I found the desk lamp easily enough, the brass one he'd used for reading every evening. My hands trembled as I turned it over, searching for the base. There it was, a small panel that slid away to reveal a tiny recording device, no bigger than a flash drive. Thomas had always been better with technology than I'd given him credit for. I slipped the device into my pocket and headed upstairs to our bedroom. Our wedding photo still sat on the dresser, the one place Amanda hadn't touched yet. Behind it, taped to the back of the frame, just like every anniversary gift he'd ever hidden, was a small silver key, the safety deposit box key. Even in death, Thomas was still leaving me clues the way he had for 42 years. Friday morning, I was at First National Bank when they opened. The box was registered under both our names, but the access card showed that Thomas had visited it just 1 week before he died. Inside the box was a manila envelope marked, "For Ruth, in case of emergency," in Thomas's careful handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. The first document was a copy of Thomas's real will, witnessed and notarized, leaving everything to me. The second was the complete investigator's report on Amanda Richardson Morrison Chen, with photographs and documentation of her previous marriages. The third was a handwritten letter in Thomas's distinctive script. "My dearest Ruth," it began, "if you're reading this, then my worst fears have come true. Amanda is not who she pretends to be, and I suspect she's capable of much more than we imagined. I've documented everything I could discover about her past and her behavior in our home. Please take this information to the police and to James Harrison. Don't let her destroy our family the way she destroyed her previous families. You are stronger than she thinks, and you have more allies than you know. Michael will understand eventually. Protect yourself first. I love you, Thomas. At the bottom of the envelope was a small plastic bag containing 3 pills from the supplements Amanda had been giving him, along with a note. Had these tested privately. Results attached. The lab report made my blood run cold. The pills contained digitalis, a heart medication that could be fatal in the wrong doses, especially for someone with Thomas's condition. I sat in that small bank vault, surrounded by Thomas's final gift to me, and cried for the man who had been protecting me even when I thought he was too weak to protect himself. That afternoon, I called Mr. Harrison and Detective Sarah Martinez from the fraud department. We met at Harrison's office, where I played the recordings from Thomas's device. Amanda's voice filled the room, clear and calculating in ways I'd never heard before. "The old man is getting suspicious," she was saying in one recording. "He's been asking too many questions about my past." A male voice I didn't recognize responded. "So what's the plan?" "Same as always," Amanda replied. "Just need to speed up the timeline. His heart condition makes it easy. A little extra medication here and there, some stress about his wife's mental state. The doctor won't question anything." Detective Martinez looked grim as she took notes. "How many recordings are there?" "Hours of them," I said. Thomas documented everything. Her talking about forging documents, about isolating me from Michael, about her previous husbands. The most damning recording was from just 2 days before Thomas died. Amanda was on the phone with someone, discussing the fake will and power of attorney documents. "Patterson has everything ready," she was saying. "The old lady won't know what hit her. By the time anyone questions anything, she'll be locked away in that nursing home and I'll have sold everything." "What about the son?" the other voice asked. "Michael does whatever I tell him to do. He's completely under my control. Besides, once his father is gone and his mother is declared incompetent, he'll inherit everything through me anyway." Detective Martinez stopped the recording. "Mrs. Morrison, this is enough for multiple felony charges. Fraud, forgery, elder abuse, and possibly murder. What happens now?" "Now we arrest Amanda Morrison," she said, reaching for her phone. "And we need to exhume your husband's body for toxicology testing." The arrest happened the next morning. I wasn't there to see it, but Detective Martinez called to tell me that Amanda had been taken into custody at her apartment. They'd found more forged documents, contact information for Patterson, and a bottle of digitalis hidden in her bedroom. Michael called me 2 hours later, his voice broken and confused. "Mom," he said, and I could tell he was crying. "I don't understand what's happening. They arrested Amanda. They're saying she killed Dad." "Oh, sweetheart," I said, my heart breaking for my son. "Come home. Come to the house. We need to talk." When Michael arrived, he looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. I showed him everything: the investigator's report, the recordings, the lab results. He sat at our kitchen table, the same table where Amanda had presented her fake documents, and listened to his wife's voice plotting his father's murder. "I didn't know," he kept saying. "Mom, I swear I didn't know any of this. She's very good at manipulation," I said gently. "Your father almost didn't figure it out in time, but he did figure it out," Michael said, looking at Thomas's letter. "And he protected you. He protected both of us." 2 weeks later, Amanda's trial made headlines in our local newspaper. The evidence was overwhelming. The recordings, the forged documents, the digitalis, and the investigator's report detailing her previous crimes. She was convicted of first-degree murder, fraud, and elder abuse. But the most satisfying moment came when the real Mr. Patterson, the fraudulent attorney, testified against her in exchange for a reduced sentence. He detailed exactly how Amanda had recruited him, how she'd done this before, and how she'd planned to disappear once she'd liquidated all of Thomas's assets. The house was mine again, legally and officially. The bank accounts were unfrozen. Golden Years Manor was canceled. More importantly, Michael was mine again, too. Amanda's manipulation had run deeper than even I'd realized. But with her gone, my son was slowly returning to the person he'd been before she'd poisoned his mind against his own family. 3 months after the trial, I was in Thomas's office, finally unpacking the boxes Amanda had prepared for donation. At the bottom of one box, I found a small wrapped present with a note in Thomas's handwriting. "For our 43rd anniversary, if I'm not here to give it to you myself." Inside was a simple gold bracelet with an inscription: "You are stronger than you know. T." I fastened it around my wrist and felt Thomas's presence in the room with me. He'd kept his promise to protect me, even from beyond the grave. Amanda had thought she could erase me from my own life, steal my home, my family, my future. She'd called me weak, incompetent, a burden, but she'd forgotten one crucial thing. I wasn't just Thomas Morrison's widow. I was the woman who'd raised a family, built a life, and survived 42 years of joys and sorrows. I was the woman Thomas had fallen in love with and trusted to carry on his legacy. And I was the woman who'd brought down a killer. 6 months after Amanda's conviction, I was sitting in my garden on a warm spring morning, watching the roses Thomas had planted begin to bloom again. The house felt like home for the first time since he'd died, not just because Amanda was gone, but because I'd finally stopped being afraid of my own life. Michael had moved back in temporarily while his divorce was finalized. It had taken weeks of therapy and honest conversations for him to understand how completely Amanda had manipulated him. But my son was slowly returning to the man his father had raised. "Mom," he said, joining me on the porch with 2 cups of coffee. "I got the final papers yesterday. It's over." I squeezed his hand. We'd both learned that sometimes the end of something terrible is just the beginning of something better. The settlement from Amanda's estate, what little remained after her legal fees and restitution to her previous victims, went into a fund I'd established with Mr. Harrison's help. The Ruth Morrison Foundation provided legal assistance to elderly people facing financial abuse from family members. We'd already helped 12 families in our county alone. Detective Martinez had called the week before to tell me that the investigation into Amanda's previous husbands had been reopened. The evidence we'd uncovered about digitalis poisoning had provided new leads in those cases. Other families were finally getting answers they'd waited years for. "She won't hurt anyone else," the detective had said. "You made sure of that." But the most healing change was the simplest one. My grandchildren were coming for Sunday dinner again. Michael had explained to them, in age-appropriate terms, that Daddy had made some mistakes about Amanda, but that everything was better now. They didn't need to understand the details. They just needed to know that Grandma's house was safe again. 8-year-old Emma had asked me directly, "Grandma, why didn't we see you for so long?" "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes," I told her, "but the important thing is that we fix them when we can." "Did Daddy make a mistake?" "Yes, sweetheart, but he fixed it." She'd nodded solemnly and then asked if I could make her favorite cookies. Some things were just that simple when you stripped away all the manipulation and fear. I'd kept one item from the evidence box after the trial, Thomas's letter to me. I read it sometimes when I missed him most, reminded by his words that love doesn't end with death. Real love continues in the choices we make, the strength we find, the ways we protect the people who matter most. The letter had one line I'd memorized. "You are stronger than she thinks, and you have more allies than you know." Thomas had been right about the allies. Mr. Harrison had become not just my lawyer, but a friend who checked on me regularly. Detective Martinez stopped by occasionally to update me on the case and to bring her elderly mother to visit. Even some of the neighbors who'd watched silently during Amanda's manipulations had come forward to apologize and offer support. But Thomas had been most right about my strength. I'd discovered that the woman who'd raised children, managed a household, and built a 42-year marriage hadn't disappeared when she became a widow. She'd just been buried under grief and manipulation. Amanda had tried to convince me I was weak, dependent, incompetent, but when it mattered most, I'd fought back, and I'd won. 3 days ago, I'd received a letter from Amanda in prison. I'd almost thrown it away without opening it, but curiosity got the better of me. "Ruth," it read in her familiar, careful handwriting, "I hope you understand that I never wanted to hurt you personally. You were just in the way of what I needed to accomplish. Thomas was dying anyway. I just speeded up what was already happening. You would have lost everything eventually. I was actually helping you by taking control when I did." Even from prison, she was still trying to manipulate the narrative, still trying to make her cruelty sound like kindness. I'd torn up the letter without finishing it. Amanda's story was over. Mine was just beginning again. This morning, Michael was making plans to buy his own house nearby. "I want to stay close," he'd said. "I have a lot of time to make up for." "You don't owe me anything," I'd told him. "You were a victim too. Maybe. But I'm still your son, and I should have protected you. You're protecting me now. That's what matters." As I sat in my garden, I thought about all the ways this could have ended differently. If Thomas hadn't been suspicious enough to investigate Amanda, if he hadn't left me the evidence I needed, if I hadn't been brave enough to fight back when it mattered. But he had, and I had. Amanda had called herself the legal widow, claimed that the law was on her side, tried to erase me from my own life. She'd blocked me from my husband's funeral, stolen my home, isolated me from my family. and convinced everyone that I was incompetent and disposable. But she'd made one fatal error. She'd underestimated the depth of a 42-year marriage. She'd thought that death would end Thomas's ability to protect me. She was wrong. In the end, it wasn't the law that decided who belonged in this family, in this house, in this life. It was love, real love, the kind that plans ahead and leaves evidence and fights back from beyond the grave. Amanda had tried to have the last word in Thomas's story, and in mine, but this was our house, our family, our legacy, and I was the one who was still here to tell it.